District of Conservation is sponsored by CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thank you so much for listening. Welcome to District of Conservation. I am your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. This is a breaking news podcast episode. I want to briefly discuss the creation of the new special envoy for Biodiversity and Water Resources position under the State Department. And that individual who will be leading this new position is named Monica Medina, who conveniently, unfortunately for the Washington Post having left out deliberately, is the wife of White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain. We're going to talk about her background briefly, what positions she's taken, and really if this position is necessary, given the fact that we have lots of conservation outlets. We have the Department of Interior, we have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we have a lot of agencies, sub-agencies, people already handling this position. Why do we need someone to advocate for us internationally? Is there a catch to that? We'll explore that in today's special episode of District of Conservation. I saw a tweet this morning and I couldn't help but submit my thoughts on this position because when you look at it on face value, and this is from Glenn Kessler, who is the Washington Post fact checker, and he, in his publication, or rather his publication announced that there's a new special envoy for plants and animals, and that is Monica Medina. And obviously it's behind a paywall. I'm not going to pay money to read the Washington Post because they haven't given me a reason to subscribe to them. But when I'm able to catch their articles, not behind a paywall, I do pay attention too. But it struck me as really interesting because this administration has created, the Biden administration, before we dip into Monica Medina's background, has created all these positions that really don't amount to anything. They're very ceremonial, but these people are being paid to be in these positions. You have Special Climate Envoy John Kerry, who was formerly Secretary of State. You had Gina McCarthy, who was also in a similar role, a kind of advisory role, not a special envoy, but John Kerry is an envoy. Now we're creating these envoy positions that reward their political friends, of course, the work that they're doing to advance climate change activism, to advance stewardship and environmentalism, and to address the climate crisis, things of that sort. And it's unsurprising to me that we would see such a position created. I know it sounds bizarre at face value, a special envoy for animals and water. And the position is ridiculous, like I said, because it's pretty redundant, because we already have a Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, and many sub-agencies that fall under the purview. We don't need to have more bureaucrats administering conservation and actually tainting conservation, if we can make that argument, because in my assessment, this administration is undoubtedly tainting conservation, muddling it with preservationist actions to keep out stakeholders and to push these really bizarre positions that have nothing to do with conservation whatsoever. It's to prop up their special interests and clean energy interests, anti-hunting interests. So, of course, this is a position that's par for the course for this administration. I'll read for you the press release from the State Department about her official appointment, Miss Medina's appointment, or Mrs. Ron Klain's appointment, rather. Monica Medina named Special Envoy for Biodiversity and Water Resources. This was dated September 28th, 2022. Secretary Antony Blinken has designated Monica Medina as the U.S.'s Special Envoy for Biodiversity and Water Resources, signaling the Biden administration's commitment to resolving the world's intertwined biodiversity and water crises. Monica Medina is the Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs and will take on the Special Envoy designation in addition to her current roles. The months ahead are important for advancing efforts to confront these crises and enhance U.S. leadership is essential for raising global ambition and securing a healthier planet for generations to come. The 2022 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the December meeting of the Convention of Biological Diversity Conference of Parties, COP15, and the Intergovernmental Conference negotiating a new agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of high seas biodiversity present a unique confluence of global efforts to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity and promote water security. Special Envoy Medina will coordinate all government effort to address these crises comprehensively, leveraging talent and expertise in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environment and Scientific Affairs, with resources from across federal government departments and agencies. Moreover, her designation as a special envoy will strengthen the department's role in implementation of the White House Water Security Action Plan and Global Water Strategy, as well as provide high-level leadership ahead of the 2023 UN Conference of Water. And you can read the rest of the press release about pressing crises that we're supposed to be aware of for yourselves in the show notes. But I want to briefly discuss her background and some of the positions that Miss Medina, Mrs. Ron Klain, takes. So she's not someone who just came out of nowhere. And topically speaking, she has had some foray in the environmental space for quite a while. I'll give her that. So she apparently worked on Capitol Hill in the United States Committee on Environment and Public Works, largely for Democrats. No question there, from 1989 to 1992. And in the Clinton administration, she worked under Janet Reno as a Deputy Associate Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice with oversight in the Environmental Division. She was General Counsel at National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. CNN host Don Lemon is trying to discredit a NOAA administrator in wake of Hurricane Ian and call into question his credentials when he said that not every hurricane event can be attributed to climate. And then in the 2000s, she worked for the Pew Environment Group, where she was responsible for advice and assistance on issues of marine law and policy. And she also worked in the U.S. Office of the International Fund for Animal Welfare and spent a number of years at a law firm focusing on environmental law. In the Obama administration, she was Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Oceans and Atmosphere at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. She also served as the U.S. Commissioner to the International Whaling Commission, and apparently she led efforts on Arctic conservation, restoration of the Gulf of Mexico, following Deepwater Horizon spill. But more currently, I think this is where we all have to pay attention. So she leads a outlet called Our Daily Planet. And Our Daily Planet is described as a leading independent environmental news platform covering the climate crisis, conservation, and beyond. It was founded because we saw a need for environmental news sources that was easy to consume but also broke down complicated topics, gave context, and explained how climate change is connected to social justice, national security, public health, the economy, etc. We give you the information to stay informed on the issues as well as the ways in which you can make a difference. We hope Our Daily Planet starts conversations on climate and conservation, inspires action, and connects everyone to how we contribute to the well-being of the planet in big and small ways. And she has written different pieces, and unsurprisingly, she is a champion of the Green New Deal. She has several op-eds that she's penned, that she has bylines with, supporting the Green New Deal. This is from the Huffington Post. The headline reads from 2019, "The Green New Deal's sudden popularity is a reason for climate change optimism." You can read that for yourself. She has also authored recent blog posts called "Climate Change's Impact on the Afghanistan Crisis." And she supports the rollbacks to the Trump-era WOTUS rules. So from 2021, Biden administration moves to reverse Trump rollbacks of Clean Water Act. It was not a rollback. It was a modernization of it. And she talks about drought in Lake Mead. And she has over 306 pages on Our Daily Planet under her name. You can check that out. So Green New Deal supporter believes that we're in a existential climate crisis. And I think, excluding initial coverage of her so far, I think she's probably going to be tasked with implementing 30 by 30, if I'm not mistaken, on a more international scale, because the Biden administration has this goal, if you're unaware, of so-called conserving 30% of waters and 30% of lands by 2030. This is a big initiative for them under the America the Beautiful plan, which masquerades as conservation, but it's actually preservation. And it's very innocent sounding. It actually terribly defines what conservation is. The conservation terms defined are very vague. And people in conservation, whether they are in the hunting, fishing, shooting sports, and other stakeholders in the outdoor industry, have called into question what this plan does. And when you talk to ranchers and farmers, you see that they are very skeptical of this plan and what it would do potentially to private property rights and true conservation as we know. But I think she's also going to be tasked with perhaps advancing America the Beautiful on a more global scale, 30 by 30 plan, more so on a global scale. And that's just the limit, the bare minimum threshold. I think they're going to advance 50 by 50. But if you need to learn more about 30 by 30, you can comb through on past episodes to learn more about that. So that is what this new special envoy, Monica Medina, Mrs. Ron Klain, will be tasked with. And we will follow her adventures and we'll follow her actions here on the podcast. Thanks for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't already, make sure you find us on your preferred podcast player. We largely circulate on Apple, Spotify, and countless others, but those are our two big podcast platforms we want to push. Make sure you're subscribed there, especially on Apple. If you like the podcast a lot, go leave us some reviews. We'd be more than grateful to get some 5-star reviews from you guys. Moreover, we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and a little bit on YouTube. We don't populate there, but connect with us on social media. Find me personally on social media with blue check marks. Super easy to find, and I would love to hear your feedback and know who you'd like to see on the podcast. Thanks for listening to District of Conservation. Stay tuned for the next episode.